Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM, KFYO. Final segment of this half hour. And joining us right now on the phones from Washington, D.C., Congressman Jodey Arrington. Congressman, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Chad. It's wild and woolly up here in Washington. I can't wait to get back this weekend. Wish I could be in the studio with you, but I guess we'll have to do this via conference call, but it's good to be with you.
Well, it's y'all are awfully busy. There's news out, I guess it came out last night, that Republicans are going to try again, aiming for next week, to pass a health care bill. What do you know about that? I'm sure you're in the loop on at least trying again. I don't know exactly what the timetable is. And is this going to be the same bill that was attempted last time, or is it going to be changed a little bit?
Well, it's to be determined on that. I mean, look, every opportunity to make it better. I've always said it wasn't perfect, but I do believe it's even as it is today, a big step in the right direction because, first of all, because it's just a disaster out there in the market. The exchange is imploding, and everybody knows about the premiums, the skyrocketing cost with $4,300 on average for families on deductibles, and the list goes on and on. So we've got to do something. That's, my frustration is this was a mandate. The president understood that. The president is the best negotiator in chief we've ever had. And, my comments in the paper were we can't let perfect be the enemy of good. I still stand by that. I mean, when you're repealing we're ripping the guts out of this thing. We're repealing the mandates, individual and business. We're repealing the essential health benefits, which means the markets can create products that we need and can afford instead of what the government tells us that you have to, the requirements that they put on paper. And then we're also repealing $1 trillion in taxes, and we've never reformed an entitlement program like we are with Medicaid and reducing deficit spending by now I think it's $150 billion, but it's the largest entitlement reform. We need a whole lot more of that because of our deficit and debt position. So that's just part of the reasons why I think it's a step in the right direction. Look, if they open up this on the policy front, I'm going to keep pushing. For example, we carried the water in the Budget Committee, and I was fighting for work requirements. I'd like them to be mandated, but right now they're just optional for states. So there's still room to make it more conservative and more fiscally responsible. But, we're talking. That's all I can tell you is that we're all talking among ourselves as the Republican conference so we can move this thing forward, give our president a win, give the American people a win, and then move on into tax reform and this bold agenda that we've got before us.
I want to ask you about something that's popped up in the last couple of days, dealing with health care, of course. President Trump came out and said, hey, maybe I'll work with Democrats on a health care fix. Speaker Paul Ryan came out yesterday and said, no, we don't want that to happen because, well, in other words, it's not going to be a conservative piece of legislation. We all know that. If the Democrats have a hand in it, it's not going to look anything near conservative. And we even had Senator John Cornyn, who was quoted by the AP, saying that the next bill that comes out won't go through reconciliation. It'll have to be a bipartisan bill. Is the hope that if this comes to a vote next week, that we can avoid the bipartisanship of it to where you don't have to work with Democrats? It can be a Republican bill and hopefully a conservative bill that Trump eventually signs.
Yes, listen, Chad, we have an opportunity to have a conservative bill and a gigantic step in gutting this awful law and getting to the free market patient-centered principles that we all believe in as conservatives. The fact that we weren't able to do it, and if we don't do it with the window closing and moving on to the reconciliation that we're going to use for tax reform, it will be a disaster because then you're negotiating not with ourselves in terms of conservatives because we only need a simple majority. That's why we're using this reconciliation. That's why it's a little more complicated than I'd like it to be, but it's the reality. You can't get 8 more votes to do anything substantively to repeal Obamacare and replace it in the Senate. That's why we're taking great, pains to make this thing work. But you do not want to negotiate with the Democrats on health care because it will be so watered down. I don't even know that we'll get our freedom to choose when it comes to opting out of health insurance or health insurance products that aren't signed off on by the government, and the list goes on. We'll certainly not. I'll tell you this. We will not be able to block grants to the states, finally, put some fiscal discipline and freeze the Medicaid expansion and have work requirements. There are a lot of things that I know won't happen. We will not reform entitlement spending, which is going to be, to me, the death of America as we know it with respect to a sovereign debt crisis if we don't start cutting the spending on this runaway entitlement program. So you're not going to get anything close, anything remotely close to what we've got currently in the American Health Care Act. So can we make it a little better? Listen, you're negotiating with people along the spectrum in the Republican Party. So you make one group happy, you make the other group unhappy.
Right.
You've got to get that 215 votes, get this thing through, give our president a win, and give Americans a break, and let's get on to continuing to reform the regulatory environment and taxes and get our economy growing like we know it can.
I want to give you an opportunity here, and I know we're going to have another segment with you when we come back after the top of the hour, but I want you to address something that you've been, that some voters have criticized, not only you, but all Republicans on going through this process. And that is, and I'm sure you've heard about it, I'm sure you've gotten calls on it, every Republican campaign on a full repeal, or at least that's what voters heard, was we thought this was going to be completely repealed and nothing replaced. And in fact, that's what some members, I believe, of the Freedom Caucus want, is a full repeal of Obamacare and not go back to the government having to do anything with health insurance. Tell folks why that is that possible. If it's not possible, why?
So there is what we're saying is, and this is what I believe, and I can look you in the eye and all my constituents, this effectively repeals it, okay? Because you take the mandates out, you take the taxes, you take the subsidies, and you unravel the regulations that is Obamacare. So you pulled the heart out, you've killed it. However, it's true that actually on paper having the words repeal the Affordable Care Act could only happen if you had 60 votes in the Senate. So there are some things that you cannot do without the 60 vote rule, because it's not the budget process, it has to be budget in nature. If it's policy in nature, let's say, for example, interstate competition. We know we need competition. We know that's part of making the market work and make it healthy, costs come down, et cetera. Well, that's something that requires 60 votes. So we're not going to kill the ability to zero out, the mandates on account of that. So it's a little complicated. I would tell you it guts Obamacare and gives us the best shot at a full repeal over time. But we don't have 8 Democrats who are going to vote for a repeal. Well, and go ahead.
Well, and in about the minute we have left, I want to get to that real quick. That's the third bucket, that the competition over state lines and buying insurance across state lines. If the votes aren't there right now for it, how confident are you, and should voters be, that those votes are going to be there if buckets 1 and 2 go through?
Well, let me just say this. You've got 6,000 pages. You have 1,400 the Secretary shall, the Secretary may in Affordable Care Act. So the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tom Price, can do a whole lot of unraveling through administrative action, okay? So if you couple what we can do through this reconciliation plus what Tom Price can do, you're 80% of the way there. So I can't make any guarantees about the 60 votes on all these other sort of free market reforms. I can just say that if we wait for that, we've sent things over there that were full repeal. They never went anywhere. So we can keep doing that, hoping that one day magically 8 Democrats will wake up and say, "Oh, I'm for the full repeal of Obamacare," or we can get to ripping the guts out of this thing and moving it forward, and I think fulfilling our promise to the people we represent.
Visiting with Congressman Jodey Arrington. Congressman, going to ask you to hold over for one more segment, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
Great. And then we'll continue our conversation on this and other issues as well, including term limits, which I know is something that you're very passionate about. That's coming up in the next hour of the program. So we'll put the congressman on hold. When we come back, much more with Congressman Jodey Arrington on the Chad Hasty Show. Returning on the phones right now from Washington, D.C., it's Congressman Jodey Arrington. And, Congressman, thanks again for appearing on the program today. Let's continue our discussion a little bit more on Obamacare and on the replacement of Obamacare. When this was first rolled out, and you had the 3-bucket solution, and I'm not sure that, when you had a 3-bucket solution, it's something that's almost difficult to explain, how everything's going to work and why the 60 vote threshold isn't there. You had Senator Paul, who was going around calling this Obamacare light. It seems to me that this thing was sunk before it even got started. How does a restart happen to where you can get Republicans on board, conservatives on board, to where conservatives look at this and say, and I'm talking about the Freedom Caucus and others who say, okay, what you're going to put forward is a good piece of legislation. How do you sell this again to the American people?
So let's back up to what you initially said about the way this was rolled out, because I'm trying to work through what's real and what's not real, and I have a great deal of respect for Rand Paul and others. And I agree with him in principle about, what we would want to see in a piece of legislation, in a perfect piece of legislation, in one that in a magical, mystical world has Democrats that would vote for it, that where you could get 60 votes. But I think there's been a false choice out there. And so with that false choice that you would have to get 60 votes, not a simple majority in the Senate, then you look at what we're trying to do with reconciliation, and sure, it's not as conservative. I want the same thing that the folks that are talking about want, but I'd rather get something passed that guts Obamacare instead of being able to come back and say to my district, listen, I tried, but we couldn't get the 8 Democrats to join us in the Senate. That's just, to me, that's not dealing in reality. We've got to do something, and we've got to deliver results, because I think that's why people elected us. That's why people sent President Trump to the White House, because they were tired of just talking and not delivering on our conservative results and the promises we were making. So you're right, though, Chad. 3 buckets, who wants to sell that? When you're explaining, you're losing. But the reality is this thing came in different buckets. Obamacare came with 60 votes when the Democrats had 60 votes, and then it came through reconciliation when they needed to do more when they didn't have 60 votes. So we're going to have to do the same thing. Now, in 2015, I want your listeners to hear this. In 2015, the Republicans in the House, 239 out of 242, they voted for the same reconciliation, called it a repeal, and put it on Obama's desk, and he didn't sign it. We said we would have repealed it if Obama signed it. This is more conservative than that, and now we're talking and debating among ourselves about how that it's not perfect, even though it rips out the repeal, rips out $1 trillion in taxes, deficit spending by over $150 billion, gives state flexibility, expands health savings accounts, gives tax credits so it gives parity to those who don't have insurance by their employer. My goodness, I got to tell you that we'll be in real big trouble if we can't move this forward. Now, I am talking to folks. I'm talking to the Freedom Caucus. I'm talking to all the members, the leadership, everyone. And we're going to get this through. I'm still hopeful. And the president, I think, is re-engaging now. The leadership certainly is, and all members of the Republican conference. So we cannot miss this. because this is our time. God has had mercy. He's given us a window, and we cannot hand this back over in the midterm elections, lose the majority, and miss the opportunity to get our country back and to do the things that we want to do down the road beyond just health care reform. So go ahead and ask me another question.
Final question on health care. Final question on health care, and I have to ask you this. The president sent out a tweet this morning, and he said the Freedom Caucus will hurt the entire Republican agenda if they don't get on the team and fast. I think everyone's assuming he's talking about health care. We must fight them and Dems in 2018.
You know, we're either negotiating with the Democrats for a much weaker, less conservative path forward, or we're going to get agreement with our own conference and our own family of conservatives. And that's just life. I've never seen a perfect deal. I've never seen a perfect piece of legislation. And I think part of it is we're kind of growing as a Republican conference, but we better grow up fast because we've had 7 years or 8 years, 7 years with this law, but 8 years of Obama where we were an opposition party, and rightfully so. Now we got to govern. Now we got to lead. Trump's right. Trump's telling the truth. You know, that guy, one thing about our president is he's going to tell you the truth. Now, I love my brothers in the Freedom Caucus. I believe the same thing they believe, but I'm not going to let some idealistic view of the world or of the outcomes that I would like to see, because I think that everybody should think exactly like I do, and if I don't get exactly what I want, then I'm not going to do it. I want my folks back home to know that's not how I'm going to lead. That's not the way I think we can govern and keep the majority and achieve this conservative vision, this constitutional republic restoration plan for the people that we represent. And I think Trump gets that, but I think the Freedom Caucus is going to come around, and I think that the members of the Republican conference are going to ultimately come together and deliver for this president and the people.
You have a few more minutes, right?
I got a few more minutes, and they have called the votes. How much time do I have? Okay, I'm going to walk with you and talk with you as I walk to the vote. So I'm not letting you up. I want to answer every question on this. This is way too important, so I'm walking down the hall. Keep going. I'm
going to change it up because I've had a number of people email me about this, and that is the vote on the FCC internet privacy protections that the House passed, Senate passed. It's going to go to President Trump's desk. According to the Washington Post, they say if Trump signs the legislation as expected, providers will be able to monitor customers' behavior online and sell that information to different ad agencies and everyone else. A lot of people concerned about their privacy with this bill. Your comments on it?
Well, just remember that the Washington Post and the Democrats said that we'd bring the world would come to an end if we repeal Obamacare. So this is every Republican, I think, in the House voted for this. Ted Cruz and Cornyn, our senators in the Senate, voted for this to repeal this rule. This is not about privacy. This is about the FCC regulating in a space they shouldn't regulate. It is not their purview. This is an overreach. We believe in rule of law, so we're going to let the FTC do what they do, and not let the SEC, FCC, FDIC, or anybody try to go beyond their scope of jurisdiction. And that's really at the heart of this. I mean, there's a slippery slope to net neutrality. We can talk about that, but the reality is, for us as conservatives, this is an overreach. And this is an abuse of power, and this was a midnight rule by the Obama administration. So that's why all the Republicans want to repeal this rule.
We're going to let you get to the vote because I know you're walking and you're about to get to voting. So next time I want to talk to you about term limits because I know it's a big passion of yours. You've got legislation out there regarding that. So I do want to talk to you about that sometime. But one final request. See if Speaker Ryan wants to come on the show. We'd love to have him sometime.
I'll do that, but I'll tell you this.
Put a good word in for us, okay?
Listen, I will.
See, he's breaking up. I knew it. I knew. There we go. Congressman, your phone's breaking up there in the Capitol, okay?
Okay, Chad. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you, Congressman.
All right. Bye-bye.
That's Congressman Jodey Arrington. And maybe he'll get the speaker on with us at some point. Maybe that'll happen. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO.